In this documentary, you'll travel back to 1968 and watch how a quiet Bay Area suddenly became a hunting ground. Between 1968 and 1974, the Zodiac claimed dozens of victims, while investigators could only confirm 5 murders. Though in his own words, the killer boasted of 37. Was this a killer's ego, or a code we've yet to understand? Tell us what you think in the comments. You'll hear how the name Zodiac emerged not from investigators, but from the killer himself. Then, we'll trace his ciphers, his taunts, and his chilling promises, from the infamous school bus threat to a cipher cracked only in 2020. By the end, you'll see how one man transformed murder into myth. It all began in Northern California, on nights that seemed calm, until fear took root. Northern California in the late 1960s looked safe on the surface. Rolling hills, sleepy ranchland, and small towns where people left doors unlocked painted a calm picture. For many, the countryside offered quiet moments away from city life. But that calm ended in December 1968 when 2 teenagers never returned home. David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were shot on Lake Herman Road outside Vallejo, their murders sending shockwaves through the community. The crime unsettled investigators not only for its violence, but for its lack of reason. Nothing had been stolen. There was no evidence of robbery, revenge, or domestic dispute. Officers who scoured the scene found little to anchor a motive. That absence left people uneasy. If no cause could be found, then it meant anyone could be next, without warning. The mood shifted quickly. Couples who once parked under starlit skies started to avoid those winding lanes. Parents pressed warnings onto their children. Even familiar stretches of road began to feel unsafe. For the first time, residents sensed they were sharing space with danger they couldn't predict. Then, in July 1969, violence returned. At Blue Rock Springs Park, another couple was targeted while sitting in a car. Darlene Farron was fatally shot, and her companion, Michael Mageau, though grievously wounded, survived. Mageau became the key witness, the first to describe what had happened. He saw not a faceless figure in the dark, but a man who approached with intent and opened fire. His survival shifted the investigation, offering something tangible where before there had been only mystery. But the relief of that clue came with a darker realization. This was not an isolated incident. Detectives, comparing evidence across both scenes, began to see the outline of calculation. The attacks shared too many similarities to be random. Couples chosen in secluded spots, no theft, no personal motive. Patterns where none should exist. The possibility of a serial predator grew harder to dismiss. Meanwhile, people across the Bay Area wrestled with a different kind of fear. Not just fear of the killer himself, but of the unknown reach of his violence. Was he hunting selectively, or could anyone draw his attention? Speculation filled the void, and the lack of clear answers made the anxiety worse. But the case went from agonizingly local to a story the entire region would soon inhabit, when the killer began to write. Even if the shootings had ended on those 2 nights, the scars would have lingered. But the gunfire was only the opening act. Ahead lay something even more chilling, a voice. A presence that would leave the shadows behind and step into the lives of thousands, not with bullets, but with words. Imagine a murderer choosing not the shadows of back roads or the silence of interrogation rooms, but the front pages of newspapers as his stage. On July 31st, 1969, 3 nearly identical typed letters arrived at the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner. Each contained 1/3 of a 408-character cipher, a puzzle of strange symbols and hidden meaning, and each came with a demand: print them, or more people would die. It was less a request than an ultimatum. Was it ego or calculation? Tell us what you think in the comments. No value investing is the Spranger. The Spranger was reason is the time. But it is before the Fourier says, I smallest sky to invest, which means that happened a Fourier concert, because they These letters were not confessions in the traditional sense. They carried arrogance, yes, but also structure and intent. The ciphers seemed designed to elevate murder into something more elaborate, a game played out in full view of the public. When readers opened their morning papers to find these symbols printed on the page, the fear was sharp and intimate. Violence had breached the routine of daily life. It was no longer about crime scenes, witnesses, and police reports. The killer had written himself into every household. The place of the silence, the keys that the environment last of health, for a community already unsettled, this was a turning point. Until then, the assailant was frightening but faceless, reduced to vague sketches and half-spoken rumors. Now he was not only real but speaking directly, his words forcing police, editors, and ordinary readers to respond. That power, the ability to dictate what appeared in the press, was its own form of control. Along with the letters came a mark, a simple crossed circle symbol, a character he drew and repeated, an emblem that would become his permanent signature. As letters had no envier that the intonation of these letters offer and violence, the escalation continued. On August 4th, 1969, the examiner received another letter. For the first time, the words appeared, "This is the Zodiac speaking." With that sentence, the killer gave himself a name and an identity that would repeat endlessly in headlines, police files, and television broadcasts. It was a calculated act, branding himself in a way that stripped away the common human details investigators longed to uncover. The world would not know him as a man with a history, but as Zodiac, a title carried alongside his symbol. It intended of the editor cuz that the environment self is letters of breaks to people. Faced with the threat of more bloodshed, editors printed his ciphers and statements. They did not do so out of admiration or curiosity, but because refusing ran the risk of further deaths. The press acted under the weight of that danger, and in doing so, allowed every reader to become an unwilling participant in the unfolding drama. His puzzles were not locked away as evidence. They were scattered across living rooms and breakfast tables. The press would figure in violence. The Pressolation Frankses, the university, and Save the Letter. The accidents available sending face to the new symbol would be cipher. And so, what followed was a shift from words on a page to a game that pulled the public directly into its grasp. Codes and threats joined violence, turning every communication into both a challenge and a warning. The first major step came with the 408-character cipher printed in 3 newspapers during July and August 1969. For days, it resisted experts, until a schoolteacher, Donald Hardin, and his wife Betty sat down at their kitchen table and solved it. The solution was unnerving. It spoke of killing as a source of pleasure, and compared death to a harvest, claiming victims would become his slaves in an imagined afterlife. Yet the promised revelation, his name, was missing. Instead, the cipher revealed only how he thought, not who he was. That refusal marked the beginning of a pattern. He gave just enough to be solved, then withheld what mattered most, keeping the police and the public circling in frustration. Each puzzle became less about answers and more about control. The murders had unsettled California, but the letters and ciphers amplified that fear far beyond the crime scenes themselves. Homes and schools became part of his strategy, because anyone who opened a paper could feel threatened. The escalation sharpened in October 1969. Just days after the murder of San Francisco cab driver Paul Stine, a letter postmarked October 13th arrived at the Chronicle. It included a blood-stained piece of Stine's shirt as proof of authorship. Inside, the killer shifted targets. He threatened to begin shooting children as they rode to school. The phrase alone was enough to alter daily life. Parents clutched tighter to their kids. Police cars began escorting school buses. Even routine childhood commutes were suddenly watched with rifles. These weren't idle threats on paper. They reshaped how a community lived. Less than a month later, on November 8, 1969, another communication arrived. This one carried a new cipher. 340 symbols arranged in angular blocks. Unlike the first, this one resisted every code breaker for decades. Only in December 2020 did 3 independent researchers, David Oranchek, Sam Blake, and Jarl van Eyck, announce they had solved it, with the FBI confirming the solution. The contents again bragged about killing, denied a hidden identity, and mocked law enforcement. For 51 years, though, it loomed unsolved, a phantom that reminded investigators and the public alike of how easily he dictated their attention. Why would he construct puzzles this elaborate and never place his real name inside? Further letters layered new threats with unsettling sketches. In April 1970, one note arrived with a crude diagram of a bomb and a short 13-symbol cipher, claiming he could destroy a school bus. Even without evidence that such a bomb existed, the suggestion extended the panic. Residents no longer feared only nighttime lovers' lanes. They feared daylight streets and classroom doors. Seen together, the messages were not simply evidence in a case file. They acted as weapons, blending puzzles, drawings, and boasts into performances forced upon the public. Murder was no longer confined to crime scenes. It was staged across newspapers, schools, and conversations at every breakfast table. And long after the crimes, the voice behind them remains part of our lives, not only for what he did, but for the lasting structure of fear he created. The Zodiac case does not rest on murders alone. It remains open because his letters and ciphers stretch the terror far beyond the crime scenes. And despite decades of investigation, his identity is still unconfirmed in multiple jurisdictions. Even with breakthroughs, such as the 2020 solution of the 340-character cipher verified by the FBI, the central question, who he was, remains unanswered. The mystery endures in culture as well. Robert Graysmith's books and the 2007 film Zodiac brought the case to new audiences, while the recent cipher solution renewed global attention. Each layer reminds us this puzzle belongs both to history and to the present. That's not going on. And small understand, the case remains unsolved. Which clue or suspect do you think investigators should reopen? The handwriting, the 2002 DNA partial, or eyewitness identifications? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe if you want more methodical, chaptered examinations of cold cases. Some mysteries refuse closure. Pause and ask yourself, what if the answer has always been within reach?